It is very heartwarming to see the number of participants. Respecting the fact a lot of us have been waiting patiently, we are now formally starting our event. Our council, National Legal Awareness Council, is council members and is led by our president, Ms. Umang Pathak, and I, Jitika Rathore, is part of the council as its vice president in an honorary role. National Legal Awareness Council, in short, we call it as NLAC, has been established to influence policymakers, regulatory bodies, and corporates to drive the agenda on women in leadership role and access to justice. The council has made internal teams to ensure we continue to drive on objectives which we have set out for. NLAC has adopted a research-based methodology to establish insights in relation to our objectives. A survey was launched prior to this launch event, which a lot of you have shared your insights. The outcome of the survey has resulted in the planning of our launch event today. Our distinguished speakers who have taken out their precious time to be here with us will share their experiences related to our objectives that we have set out for. Taking the event forward, I would now like to invite upon our national president, Ms. Umang Pathak. Umang is a lawyer by profession, and from a very early age of her professional career, she has worked very closely on social causes in various capacities. Umang, over to you, please.
Thank you, Jitika. Thanks for the kind introduction. Dear all, as the National President of WICCI NLAC, I warmly welcome you all to our launch event. To begin with, I want to share how this council has come into existence. I believe all of us keep thinking about and talking about how the world is and how it should be, especially today when in this time of crisis, these inequalities are only getting deepened. When we talk about gender parity across the globe, women earn less, save less, hold less secure jobs. They are disproportionately in informal sector, burdened with unpaid care and domestic work. And in this current crisis, this is only figuring and getting worse as more and more numbers are coming about rising domestic violence cases, loss of jobs, and such other incidents. So during this peak of the crisis, we also realize that there is an opportunity in every crisis. This crisis has completely disrupted institutions, and technology disruptions has made it, on the other hand, easier for all of us to collaborate and cooperate and integrate as we are doing today. So during the peak of the crisis, Dr. Harbeen Arora, the founder of WICCI, convinced me to take this honorary position to not only compose the National Legal Awareness Council, but to also create a country-wide network of state and union territory councils. Since that day, I have been talking to some amazing people, both men and women, and especially women, doing impactful work, experts of their own fields, to bring their picnic baskets here today, having experiences, expertise, bringing their time, effort, and energy. I'm really grateful to these amazing women who have agreed to be part of this council to help us determine our path. So here we are, completely locked down, connecting, collaborating, and working together for one sole purpose. Before I talk about what our council endeavors to do, I would like to call upon Dr. Harbeen Arora, the founder of WICCI. Dr. Harbeen Arora is the global founder of All Ladies League, Women Economic Forum, She Economy, and WICCI. Together, these platforms creates a global network of more than 2 lakh women as entrepreneurs, professionals, forging partnerships and collaborations. Dr. Harbeen Arora has been rated among the top 100 most influential people by Reputation poll of 2019. Over to you, Dr. Harbeen Arora.
Thank you, my sister Umang, Jitika, and everybody at the National Legal Awareness Council of the Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry for mean, I'm so moved and so touched that since the day Umang decided to take on the mantle of this very important role in this very significant council, not a day has passed when I have not received a text from Umang asking about something as she's doing the project, just a query, a suggestion, something, the way she has built and brought all of you together around this council in this collective purpose with people who from all kinds of such amazing backgrounds. Like Umang said, this journey has been just so beautiful for the sheer pleasure of finding sisters who are so dedicated, so motivated, and were as if waiting for something like this to come together in purpose. And like you said, Umang, there is a way the world is, and there's a way that we think the world should be from the eyes of a woman. This is our opportunity to take the steering wheel of change through the Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and through the National Council of Legal Awareness, which is also at the state levels as well. And together, steer the change towards whatever we think the world should be. Primarily, begin the change in our own selves. Because if, like, legal awareness is the name of your council, precisely that is what is a very big element. Awareness is a very big element of self-confidence, awareness about ourselves, right? And when we are living in a society, legal awareness, which, law is what ensures the uprightness, like they say. I studied in France, and they used to say, la loi c'est la droiture de l'homme, which is the law is the uprightness of the man, or humanity, I mean, of mankind or womankind, or of humanity, is the uprightness, that we all stay upright, rooted in the best of who we can be, in our character, in our ethics, in our morality. And if what we see today as a crisis and a breakdown, not only of the pandemic, but the global pandemic of domestic violence, which has been there forever across all the world, from developing societies to the developed world, everywhere the pandemic exists and continues to exist, of, let's say, just one case of domestic violence. I'm not getting into other issues where legal awareness of women can help. But there are a range of issues that afflict women. They afflict the well-being of women, and our full participation in our own lives as empowered actors. So I think legal awareness is one very big piece of that empowerment, of that self-confidence, of putting our foot forward in society without hiding, because we are constantly hiding, trying to avoid conflict, or trying to avoid getting in the way of other people. But I think legal awareness, what gives you the confidence in an embodied way to step out into society and understand what your rights are, and not be exploited or oppressed just because you don't know about it, right? India, as a country, as a nation, we have some of the finest laws also protecting women, but just the awareness of these, and there are small things that can really kind of empower us if we know about them. So I think the council has taken upon itself a very noble cause, which will bring confidence and strike out the fear that lives in the heart of every woman, no matter how educated, whatever socioeconomic strata she comes from. There's a certain fear that lives in our hearts, and why should we be living with this fear when there's a remedy, in the laws of our country, in some very eminent women lawyers leading the way as well, and such a dedicated team of women coming in a pro bono capacity, in an honorary capacity, with just the spirit to help out. The way you have started, the way you are continuing, and the phenomenal response to today's inaugural launch. I mean, there are like 150 people who registered for the event, and I see already more than 70 who are online right now. My God, more power to you. It's so touching and so moving, as I said. and I'm really looking forward to beautiful blossoming of the work that you have set into motion and set into motion so powerfully. So thank you, Umang, thank you, Jitika, and thank you all our very esteemed speakers and dignitaries enlightening the way forward for us today. Thank you so much for being there with us in support, in sisterhood, in brotherhood, and we look forward to continuing this journey hand in hand and heart connected. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Aurora, for these encouraging words. From the day one, you have been the source of inspiration and power to us. And we hope we are able to make our contribution to the purpose that we have taken on. So now going forward, WICCI NLAC, what it is about. So WICCI NLAC is a collective and collaborative network of women. We have mobilized ourselves into a force and we aim to contribute to creating a sustainable world for women. Our mission is to work towards achieving gender equality, which is one of the sustainable development goals of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Towards creating a sustainable world, our belief is that empowering women, we can work towards achieving the rest. WICCI NLAC is a platform to engage into dialogue and discourse with all relevant stakeholders that impact women, directly or indirectly, whether government, global and domestic institutions, policymakers, legislators, judiciary, legal fraternity, and so on and so forth. We also invite thought leaders to lead the discussion and share their learnings and experience with us, which will enable us to make our tangible action plan towards achieving our objectives. So this is the time to unveil our objectives that we have set out for. Our primary objectives are first, women in leadership and governance. The idea is to create or reform the institutional framework so that more and more women can join the workforce. For that, we need more and more women in leadership and governance. It's an established fact that the women in governance and leadership positions are highly underrepresented. It is also a fact that diversity brings better decision making and institutional performance. So therefore, by ensuring more women in leadership, we can ensure more women in the workforce. Our second objective is access to justice. So justice is the foundation for gender equality and women empowerment. In administration of justice, there is no scope for biases, stereotyping, or even indifference. So our aim here is to work towards strengthening the institutions, the rule of law, and building a responsive, remedial, and judicial system that advocates equality of rights for women, opportunities, and participation. So to discuss our objectives, we have called thought leaders to share their experience and learnings with us. For the first objective, I would like to call Ms. Sylvia Smetana. She is a co-founder of Divershefy Club and is a partner at Angora's Group. For more than 25 years, Sylvia has held leading roles in organizations located in Europe and US. Sylvia's passion is helping women to become top leaders and enabling more diversity in leadership, which led her to establish Divershefy to bring qualified women in boardrooms and C-suite across the world. Sylvia, welcome to our launch. Thank you so much for sparing your time. So over to you.
Thank you, Umang. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and congratulations to the launch of NLAC. We need any number of initiatives that support women. I'm happy to support as well. I think women need to support other women. This is part of why we have created also Divershefy. So the topic I'm most passionate about is women in leadership. And the reason is because I have had my own experience of 25 years in leadership and corporate leadership across the world, in the US, in Europe, and in India. I've been on boardrooms and C-suites, and it shows everywhere there is a lack of women in those bodies across all the 3 countries I've worked in. So I don't know if you can share any of the PPT that I shared with you. I don't know if that's possible, but I can also go ahead without that. I put together some global numbers for this. Women on boards, at least as of 2019, and I'm sorry I haven't updated it for 2020 yet, but is about 20% women on boards globally. In India, it's been about 17%. In the US, about 26%. We have female CEOs globally, about 21%. But if you look at the Fortune 500s, we only have about 8%. And women in senior management globally are about 29%, which in APAC is about 28%. So there is obviously an issue with the pipeline, or you can say maybe it's not a pipeline issue. And I will talk about it a little more later. What is the real issue? There's two questions I want to talk about is why do we have so few women in these top leadership positions? And the other one is why do we need more women at the top? And the good question you can ask is, do we still have to actually talk about why? Because there has been so many reports, so many studies from the big four, the PricewaterhouseCoopers, McKinsey, KPMG, and Deloitte. They all have shown that actually having women in top leadership positions is a positive result for the bottom line. So even if you don't look at anything else other than the financial means or the financial numbers, you can say that having more women in top leadership position actually benefits companies, right? So still, women have to justify, why we want more women in top leadership doesn't actually make sense, but we are still there. We still have to advocate for it. And that's also what I'm doing. I'm advocating for it. I'm raising awareness around the topic of there are still so few women and what can we actually do about it. So what we can actually do about it, I will get to in a second. But before I do that, in case anybody is not quite there yet with saying, yes, we need more women in leadership, I can give you a few more reasons why we do. Besides better governance and oversight, they are more innovative. They have the right level of confidence they're inducing into boardrooms so that men are not overconfident and taking undue risks. There's a lot more empathy. They create a collaborative culture. So there's a lot of reasons why women in leadership actually perform and bring a higher performance to companies. Okay, let's go to the point of why do we not have so many women in leadership at this point. Okay, so we did our own study. Obviously, I have my own experience, but then before we started Divershefy, we actually did some research and we talked with a lot of women in senior leadership levels, but not top yet. And we also talked with investors, corporate leaders, and board members. So we got both sides of the picture. And so we found three major findings. One is gender bias. The second one is the lack of a powerful professional network. And the third is highly qualified women are not on the radar. They're not seen. Okay. So to start with the unconscious bias, I call it unconscious and conscious bias because not everything is so unconscious. But yes, there is unconscious bias. There is a mindset issue. There's an issue of raising how we are raising boys. I won't go into the whole education part, but yes, education has to play a big role in this. We have to think about how we're talking to our boys and how we educate them. There's an unfair treatment of women in the workforce, still talking about gender bias, right? Unfair treatment of women in the workforce. Women are passed over at promotions. A lot of SVP level women I've talked with, they said they have outperformed the male peers significantly and still didn't get the promotion. So these things are happening. Obviously, there's sexual harassment, which also brings women to sometimes quit the job, to be honest. I have had my share of sexual harassment. In the beginning, I didn't even know it was sexual harassment, to be honest, because the definition only came up in the last, let's say, decade or so. Then we have the issue of maternity leave and women dropping out of the workforce because they are getting.
Sorry, Sylvia, we are unable to hear you. Unable to hear you. Sylvia? We are unable to hear you. Sorry, Sylvia, can you hear us now? Because we are unable to hear you. Sylvia? All right. By the time Sylvia is able to hear us again. Okay, Sylvia, can you hear us now? Hello? Okay. To the participants, we are sorry about this interruption, but I believe these are the of virtual event. Sylvia, could you do once you're testing again? We are unable to hear you. Okay. So till the time Sylvia is able to join and able to hear again, I would just reiterate very shortly what Sylvia has been mentioning, which is very correct. One of the quotes that I came across, just a couple of days back, that it is an established fact that so diversity is an established fact, but inclusion is actually the act. And I think a lot of organizations have made a lot of progress in that area. And what Sylvia was highlighting is it's not about why we need women in leadership. It is what makes women not reach the leadership roles. We do have women in a lot of senior leadership levels, and I'm sure a lot of us resonate with that fact. But what Sylvia was bringing in from her own experience is something that we were really keen to hear it further. So what I will do, I will request to move forward until the time my team at the back end is ensuring that Sylvia is back with us. We will move forward in interim, and we will try to take some questions from Sylvia and bring her back to our page again. What I would now request upon one of our council members, please come forward. Indira is a distinguished lawyer herself at the Delhi High Court and at the Supreme Court. She would be bringing to us our next speaker. So, Ms. Indira, over to you, please.
Thank you, Jitika. Thank you all so much for being a part of this collaborative and totally voluntary event. Thank you, participants, because without you, there is no event at all. As lead advisor to the Access to Justice program in the Legal Awareness Council, I would like to briefly dwell on our object, which is really so important. It's usually like the elephant in the room. It's often there, but yet not seen. So it's worth pausing to just recap it. We're working with the overarching SDG or Sustainable Development Goal 5, as Umang mentioned, that of gender equality, which is to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. The question is, how do we do that? So it's known that for equality, women need equal access to justice and the belief really that we will get that justice. And for this in turn, we need the following. We need laws that support gender equality. And then we need institutions that facilitate implementation of these laws. So here we're talking of two key institutions, namely the government and judiciary, as well as a host of others, educational institutions, those of healthcare, employment generation, other workplaces, the media and entertainment, just to name a few. And they can all contribute to or alleviate gender bias. Apart from this, we need timely measures or remedies that women can effectively realize that justice. So we have laws, we have institutions, and we do need to make sure that there is timely justice. We further need preventive ways by means of awareness and promotional programs. So as far as gender equality is concerned, there are several laws that we have in our country today, but the problem we have is in the implementation of the laws, where the delays are just, so enormous that justice is very seldom achieved. Then there is this mindset issue, that of deep-rooted gender bias, which comes in the way of realization. This bias is steeped in institutions. As lawyers who are practicing, we struggle on a day-to-day basis to get that justice. The very institutions of reform have shut their eyes to this bias, so that in itself becomes an area of concern. We at WICCI NLAC are trying to get conversations going on this topic and to then work with this bias to figure out ways forward to recognize them and then over a period of time, hopefully, reduce them gradually and eliminate some of them. We have with us today Maja Daruwala, who has very kindly agreed to offer her insights on this really important occasion of launch for us. Maja is presently Senior Advisor to CHRI, which is Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, and Tata Trust, and is focusing there on the Access to Justice program. She is a trained barrister and has even practiced as a lawyer for some time in this country. So she understands the huge barriers to justice in the courts in India. She spent several decades working in the areas of institutional reform through advocacy, ranging from police reform, prison reform to legal empowerment, women's rights, and human rights. She focuses on mechanisms to reduce the distance between what we keep as the standard and then the practice. She believes that the only way to be optimistic about the future is to invent it. Over to you, Maja. Thank you so much for being with us today. Maja, you're muted. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here at WICCI, and especially to you, Indira, for asking me and taking so much trouble to invite me, etc. I apologize if you will be hearing some drilling noise because there's some construction work going on. I've asked them to stop for a little while. Please, Indira, don't feel shy to tell me to stop, because when you're talking, you sort of forget the time, right? So please warn me, and I'm quite happy to stop whenever you tell me. Sure. So I think that we're again and again, at my age and seniority, or not seniority, but in the long years that I've been working, I find myself so upset and despondent that we are still talking about the same things that we talked about when I started being a lawyer. And what Miss Smetana said about being sexually harassed, like her, I didn't even know I was being sexually harassed until I discovered I was being sexually harassed. So anyway, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to particularly talk about women in the justice sector, the little part of it that I know, and also talk about the framework in which we should be looking at the how do we improve things, and what are the arguments that we should be using when we come across these so many biases. Last November, a group of us, 6 specialist organizations, came together and we created something under the aegis of the Tata Trust. And we created something called the India Justice Report. That was published last November, and this year we will publish again in either December or January of 2021. It basically looked at, statistically, the anatomy of police, prisons, legal aid, and judiciary, at the physical capacity of these organizations to deliver to their mandate, to their justice. So we looked at their infrastructure, manpower, budgets, workload, diversity. And we put them side by side, and then we rank the states to see who came first, who came second, in order to create a collated database for the public and the media and for policymakers to use to see what they could improve quickly to make the delivery of justice better. So one of the indicators and one of the things that we measured was diversity. Now, diversity is more than women. It is Dalits and STSCs and religious diversities, etc. But today I'll talk about women. And what did we find when we find? And it was entirely statistical. And it was measured against the benchmarks that the governments themselves had set. They had themselves said, we want 30% women, or we want this, or we want that. So against that standard, we measured them. So what did we find? These statistics tell half a story. They don't talk about culture, attitude, subcultures within the organizations. But at the same time, statistics are factual, and you have to then go deeper and see what happened. And it was important to look at, I'm talking today about the justice system, because the justice system itself has to demonstrate all of the value systems that they say that they are upholding. So if you say that you're upholding equity and equality, then you must be able to show it and demonstrate it within the justice system itself. So what did we find? We found that on a national average, there are no more than about 30% women in the lower judiciary. By the time you get to the higher judiciary, you fall down to about 11%. But even the 30%, it's a national average. 72% are available, and you can find them in Goa alone. So in other places, you have 4%, 5%, 3%. Now, what does this say about the judiciary? Second thing is, then we looked at the prisons, and we found that the staff in the prisons are between 11 and 12% nationally, whether it's social workers or guards or wardens or whatever it is. I'm not going into the detail of the states, etc., because I want to talk about other things also. In policing also, we found that on a national average, there's no more than 9%. Now, the mandate is for 30%, 33%. But what happens is that when you are recruiting, you get, you have a recruit, you have an intake of the amount of people you need in the year. So instead of, if you took all women, then you might increase the number of women immediately, but you don't do that. Instead, you say, well, we've got to take in only 100 people, so we'll only take in 30 women. So you make that into the process. So the process defeats the object, which is to increase the number of women. Everywhere we looked, the women were all clustered in the lower end. Not at, when you get up, if there was double digits at the lower end, by the time you got up to the higher end officers, etc., or whether it was in any of these institutions, you got into single digits. So the glass ceiling was healthy, happy, and strong over there. So when I was thinking about, I wanted to take the example of the police to indicate what you need to do to change. Oh, Jesus. Sorry. I asked them to shut this up, but can you hear it? Because I can't hear myself think.
Ma'am, I can hear you.
All right, good. So I wanted to take particularly the example of police because it kind of indicates the kinds of things that we may be up against. You see, if you want to change things, the police have a mandate to bring in 30%. So there's a benchmark there. Some states go even to say, like Bihar says, 35%. But then you come against the policy and the practice. So first you have the need for women. Why do you need women in police? Because there are laws that say only a woman can look at, if you have a complaint of domestic violence, sexual violence, you need a woman to take your complaint. That's mandatory. And there must be a woman in the police station to know what's happening. So if you don't have it, where you have these kinds of laws, you are also creating a restriction for people to come and complain. So there is a real need to have women at the structural level. But then as the lady before me was talking, there's also a value in diversity, but first and a democratic legitimacy, equality of opportunity and representation, the composition of society leads to diverse points of view, because you want to also create a new kind of culture within the police. Now, the police are not the most popular of people in this country, nor is performing. So it isn't, in my view, it isn't that the women need policing. It is the policing that needs women, if it is to be performing of its general tasks. So let me give you a alliterative mantra for change. You know, Indians love alliteration. So you can have policy, planning, pricing, practice, performance, and proof. Now let me go through these. First, you need to recognize that there is a problem. The fact that there are no women is a problem. And it's a problem that manifests itself in your performance, in your subculture, in your machismo, in your violence, and you have to recognize it so that you can do something about it. Then, once you have done this, then you have to create a plan. And this, when I'm talking about these things, I'm talking about it because it gives you a general framework. That plan requires you to understand where the problem lies. Is it in your recruitment? Is it in your retention? Is it in your promotion? Where is it? Is it unfairness within? Is it the subculture within? You have to look at data. You have to look at practice. You have to look at surveys, and then you create a plan. A plan by itself means that you need to look at it in 2 or 3 or 4 phases. So it has to be sustainable. For having a plan, you have to have pricing. You have to measure the cost. Now, that argument comes up a lot when we're talking about including women. Oh, if we have women, then we'll have to have new toilets. If we have women, we'll have to have flexi time. If we have women, we'll have to have maternity leave. But really, you've got to look at the cost benefit. In the case of women in policing, what is the cost benefit of not having women, which means that you have then about 50% of the population not coming into your police stations to even complain. So what is the cost benefit in terms of democracy, in terms of violation, in terms of response? So that is another problem that you must look at, and not just keep it to how much is it going to cost the organization, because it might actually be so much beneficial in other ways that you measure it in that way. Then the practice, the internal practice, which is of culture. You've got to look internally as well as outward to see what is the practice, as I mentioned, of recruiting, retraining, retaining, and responding. So it's a question of reimagining your whole institution to get rid of the institutional bias. There is on the web an Oxford definition of what is institutional bias. And I would strongly recommend that everybody looks at it, because I don't really have the time to do that. But what I want to make clear is that it is the institutional fault and not the fault of women being biologically different. But when she is different, you are not doing her favor, you are not giving her an accommodation, you are not making a concession when you say that there must be so many weeks maternity leave. That is only a recognition that she is not a man. And therefore, your whole institution must change to have that, and you are not doing any favors. The fact that you are not doing it is causing a great deal of problem. Now, the arguments that come up is, the last thing was performance and proofing. Then you measure the performance of the institution, as well as go back and look year on year. You do surveys, you do audits, you measure in terms of data to see, is there proof of how is this working? And then you take that performance to Parliament, to your assemblies, to say, this is the state of play last year, now this is the play this year. That's how you actually sustain change. You don't change it by doing lip service, as we have been doing for so many years. Do I have time to go on?
Maja, you have another minute or so.
Minute. Okay, fine. I want to take an example of a competence. The argument is that if we take in too many women, or too many Muslims, or too many Dalits, or too many anything, that there will be a challenge to competence. So the argument of merit is pushed against the argument of diversity. And it is a completely false and illegitimate argument, because it has within it the seeds of prejudice, that only you, as a man or as a mainstream person, have got the merit. But there is no merit in any other segment of society. That in itself is a stereotypical measurement of prejudice. If you break down, now the police and its subculture are considered to be very machismo. It is supposed to be very dangerous. It is supposed to be very militarist. Really? Let's look at what they do every day. They don't go running around after terrorists every single day. That is an exception. They don't go rioting, stopping riots every day. What they actually do is they prevent crime, they go to court, they do detection work, do management, they do supervision. All of these things are easily done by women. So if you break down the tasking, there is nothing that the woman doesn't do or cannot do. And even the law and order situations now, with all of the, you don't do it alone, but you certainly do it with a mixed group of people, rather than have the same stereotypical response to a protest, which is to charge them or lathi charge them or hurt and harm. Rather than that, you have a negotiation, a capability for negotiation. So I want to stop there, because I've run out. But I think I wanted to put all of this forward so that there should be arguments to meet the prejudices that we meet up against, and we call it tradition, and we call it important and necessary, when actually it is a framework of falsehoods which we are obliged to agree to.
Thank you so much, Maja, for that talk, which really touched upon something that is so important and broke it down into different parts. There are some questions. One is that while you've covered the police, how do you see the road ahead for the military?
I think there are just too few women in the military. I think there is no excuse for it. When we think about the military, we don't always have to think about the front line or the borders. And even there, women have acquitted themselves finely in all the other militaries that they are in, as you see in other countries. It's a question of making sense for them. One of the major reasons for not having women in the military is because there are so many men and you can't trust the men. Well, the men have got to change. You've got to trust. They've got to learn to be trusted and trustworthy. You know, an older colleague of mine said to me once, she said, you know, when you have a wild beast in a population, cage the beast. You don't cage the victim. So I think it's a question of learning. And we have got to stop saying that it's okay for men to whack women or sexually harm them or not be able to work with them or not take orders from them.
Absolutely.
It's what holds you down and makes you feel inferior and makes you perceived as inferior.
Thank you for
I haven't
that.
studied the military. I haven't studied the military in terms of statistics. But
Yes.
I don't think, I mean, if you can have, why can't you have a woman mechanic or a woman aeronautical engineer? What's the problem?
Yes. You're right. It's the exceptional that is taken up to defend non-representation, so to speak, isn't it?
And all these figures that we are given, Indira, 33%, or the usual thing that you will find in statutes, at least one woman. This is pure tokenism. What do you mean, at least one woman? What does that mean? At least one. It's a concession we will allow you to be there.
Yeah.
Why don't you say that there won't be anything more than 51% of any gender?
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to the next question, which is why is it that the workforce doesn't really embrace women in terms of them being so important for the purpose of employment and for being productive members of the workforce? So should there not be a more favorable treatment towards women rather than this kind of an, okay, I'll also have a few women in the workforce?
Precisely. And as the lady said, every study that has been done, including studies on policing, have shown, I'm particularly talking about policing because I happen to have a little bit more specialization in that area. Studies have shown that if you have women in the police station, the rather crude, rough machismo that police adore actually drops by several percentage points, much to the relief of the men, because then they don't have to behave in a certain way as if they must belong to that subculture.
Absolutely, yes. Totally. So, I think we can sort of wind up this session. These are the questions that have come in. It's really, instead of treating this whole matter of employment and representation as a favor, we really are looking at recognizing the role of women. Firstly, the recognition of the absence, and then recognizing the important role of women, actually rendering favorable treatment rather than otherwise. So thank you so much, Maja, for sharing your experience, the statistics which speak facts, and for your presence here today. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maja Daruwala, and thank you, Indira, for this interactive session. We would now like to call back upon us. Ms. Sylvia, over to you, please.
Thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I don't know what happened. I would like to quickly respond to the speaker before me, if that's okay. Just agreeing with many of the points that you actually said. especially in terms of the merit and the prejudice. So that's obviously in the corporate culture that I'm mostly talking about. This is also an issue that, say, why should we take women just because they're women? So this is not the issue. This is not really what the actual situation is. And especially when we talk about women in top leadership positions, the reason we need them there is not just to be there as women, but because they actually change the way business culture is run. And specifically, we need to bring women in at the top. And I do think the same, to be honest, for government and police, that we need to have more women leaders at the top. So we need to bring women in order to change this false perspective, this false prejudice, by actually having women at these levels, because then they will actually enable a different kind of culture and they will raise awareness. We need to raise awareness. And if we bring women into top leadership positions, they will raise awareness in their context, in their companies, in the government, in the police. So I think this is a very important point. And I would also like to quickly respond to the maternity leave. Yes, women are biologically different. And that was actually what I was about to say when I dropped off before. The maternity leave is a very important part of what we call pipeline issue. And the pipeline issue, I think there's one part that should be fixed by law, and fixed meaning it's not just the women that should be able to take maternity leave, also men need to be able to take maternity leave to make it more equal. At the same time, also, it shouldn't be the companies that have to pay for that, because if you do that, if companies have to pay for the maternity leave, they will not hire women. So the problem is you have to actually put the load onto the social security system or the government system in order for women to be able to take maternity leave and also offer it to men. So that, in my opinion, is the way to take care of the biological difference. Another point that you had brought up are 4 ways to actually go about it. One is to raise the awareness, which I'm very much doing with Divershefy. The second point is do survey and get data. And that's what we did, what I said before, we did our own research and trying to find out why we have so few women. Again, what we found was the unconscious bias that we already talked about, the lack of powerful professional network, and highly qualified women are not being on the radar. So now we have created a plan, and the plan actually shows that the lack of network, for example, is historically grown. What that means is, if you look at IIT Madras, which my husband, for example, was part of and is an alumni of, he had a batch of 200, of which 190 were men and 10 were women. Of the 190 men, 90 are very successful in boardroom, C-suites, top leadership positions. So if my husband is trying to get into boardroom or C-suite, he can call 90 of his batchmates, which is very close to, and ask for help. Of the 10 women that were in the batch, 5 stopped working altogether, 3 were very successful. So now you can count. You have 3 women who are successful in that. How many can you approach as a woman? So that is a historically grown network issue. And in order to resolve that, what it is that we are doing and what you are also doing here is creating women networks that can help establish a high-level network for women. So that is also what Divershefy is about. Divershefy Club is actually a network of women who are in boardrooms and C-suites and who help other women to get there, because we need to bridge that gap. We need to bridge that gap of women not having that kind of network. The third thing is the visibility issue. So what I mean by that is when you look at panels in conferences and even now virtual, a lot of panels have not had women on. If you look at the percentage, if I'm part of a conference, 80% of the panelists are men and only 20% are women. So why is that? I mean, here's an exception, obviously, because we're all women here, but we have to look at why is that. So obviously, again, it's a network issue partially. Women are not seen, they are not known, they are not heard. So what we are doing at Divershefy is also we are creating a speakers platform, which basically allows women to get speaking engagements. And for example, as you kindly invited me today, I'm getting invited almost every week to some kind of panel. So I will offer also some of those opportunities to other women. And we have quite a few women in Divershefy Club who are actually quite well known, and they are getting a lot of speaking engagements, and they can't necessarily do all of them. So they will offer the speaking engagements to other women so they can become more visible. I think it's a very important part of getting actually women to be successful. So what we are doing, and in terms of what you said, cost benefit and how can we actually create real change, what we are doing is we are creating an ecosystem of multi-stakeholders. We need to bring together women. We are bringing together women who are in boardrooms and C-suites, with women who want to get there, with board members who can bring women in, with investors who can bring women in, and with corporate leaders who can bring women in. So we have to raise the awareness, we have to train the women, and we have to open the doors. The thing is, if you just do one part, if you only raise awareness, you might not get there. If you only do the training, you might not get there. But if you do all three and you open the doors, we will be able to get a lot more women into top-level positions. They, in return, will enable a different kind of culture and will enable certain policies that will allow women to actually get to the top, to fix the pipeline issue. The pipeline issue cannot be fixed from the bottom up. We have to fix it from the top down. So that is my contribution.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for sharing your experience, your research, your knowledge with us. I think this theme is something which resonates with everybody, but the only difference is that we continue to fight our own individual battles, and which is, I think, where we need to step in and create a collaborative approach,
Yes.
that we are all in this together.
Exactly.
So I'll just take a few questions which are coming, very interesting questions. So first is whether government needs to incentivize the hiring of women. So basically whether government has a role to play. So whether in form of tax or some other benefits. I will just add my bit to this question as well. The legislative changes. For example, India has made it mandatory to appoint independent women directors on certain kind of companies. So this kind of efforts are usually criticized as being more favorable, and then the issue of equality comes into play. So what do you think? Who firstly was whether government has a role to play, and what kind of those reforms can be or should be?
Yes, I do think the government has a role to play. And there has been many years of discussion about quotas for women on boards or not, in Europe also, and in the US. And there is a pro and there is a con. But my opinion is, yes, we should have quotas in the beginning to break the ice, because the percentage is still so low that it's very hard to change the momentum. So we need to change the momentum by government regulations. And I'm very happy that India had at least one woman on board. It took a while to kind of make that happen. And obviously, we all know that there's a lot of women who are sitting on boards who are actually daughters, wives, of company leaders who don't really play an active role. But we can help those women to actually start playing an actual role. Yes, we do need to have a government intervention also. I do feel specifically in terms of the maternity leave. I think this is crucial. That I think in all countries has to be much more strict and not be the burden of the woman, because if the women are the one being punished, we're not going to fix the issue, right? So we need to create a way, we need to create government intervention in a way that helps the organizations, the businesses, to actually allow women to come in. What I mean by that is, women can, if you just say, okay, the woman has maternal leave and the company has to pay for it, the company stops hiring women because they don't want to pay for it, obviously. So that doesn't work. So you have to have an other mean to do that. And other means, in my opinion, is, and obviously India is a very large country. I know the impact might be huge, but I do feel a maternity leave needs to be not covered by the company, but by government or other bodies. You have to think it through more. I think there has to be some regulation on that front. I don't think you can mandate companies to hire women, period. That I don't think will work. That you do still have to assess and find out, but we need to train women. We need to make sure they have the right education. And I know there's a lot of women now in universities So the training is less of an issue, but how to bring them in and how to deal with the fact that they still have double duty at home with cooking meals for the in-laws and other things like that. These are the issues that we need to address, the double burden that women have.
That's well answered, Sylvia. It's completely in consent with that. This is already happening that, because of in Indian scenario, maternity leave for 6 months was made mandatory. So, there are clever ways of avoiding that, what corporations are trying to figure out, which is disappointing. I mean, when we think about businesses, especially, and we factor in all kind of costs for making businesses work. I mean, maternity leave, I think, creates a very small percentage of that cost. Anyway, so moving forward, the other question, very interesting again. Do women themselves are to be blamed? Are they, what stops them from claiming their own space?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Okay. So in that, I think we have to see two things. One is the question is, how is the woman brought up, right? What is the dynamics in the family that they are growing up in? Some women are brought up very independent, very much in vein of, you can do whatever you want, you're equal to men, you can just go for it, here you get great education. For those women, I agree, you just go for it and you claim your space, absolutely. But the majority of women, as far as I can tell, the education and the way they are growing up in the family, extended family community, is not necessarily encouraging them to do that. A lot of women are still told you should be nice, you should be accommodating, you should serve your husband, all these things, right? So if you're told that, and that's the kind of values you grew up with, it's very hard for a woman to independently break out of that and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something completely different. Yes, there are women who are doing that, but I think that is, again, an educational issue, an issue of the community that is bringing up girls and boys. What are we instilling into them? What is the kind of values we are creating for them? If the woman thinks, yes, it's absolutely her duty to cook for 5 or 6 or 7 people in the family before she goes to work, that is a value that is created. And maybe it doesn't work.
Yeah. Since we are short of time, I'll just take one more question, something to the similar train of communication we are having, that women themselves want to be super women. So, they want to run their houses, raise their kids, nurse, and also run businesses or, be professionals. So your thoughts on that?
Yes, that I call it the perfection gene. So women want to be perfect and we want to do it all. And the reality is we also have to face the fact that we are human beings, which also need to have downtime, which also need to take care of themselves in order to be able to continue to give. Because women often give and give and give and don't think about themselves until they break down, until they basically can't do it anymore. So I think it's our responsibility as women to make sure that we take care of ourselves enough that we are able to continue to give. So what that means for me is that, for example, if I need to go for a walk for half an hour after having been on the calls for like 8 hours straight or something, nobody should have an objection to that because we all need recovery time, right? So women are actually the ones who put a lot of pressure onto themselves often. Yes, I agree there's families that also do put a lot of pressure, but that is where we as women have to draw a line. I do think we have to get clear with our family members what it is that we can do, what we cannot do, what we can do, and be very clear on that. And some people say you can have it all. I think you can have it all in phases. I don't think you can have it all at the same time. So sometimes you might need to step down on some certain responsibilities because we are not superwomen. I don't think so. I mean, we can give a lot, but we have to be careful not to overstretch ourselves.
Absolutely, that is correct. Sometimes I feel this liberation has only enhanced the problems. But yeah, all around, I mean, the ecosystem is where we want to focus when we want to address these issues. that people who are in surrounding of these women and they are able to see what is happening should extend that support, that arm to share the burden. I think this needs to be worked holistically. I think that's where we'll end this session. Over to you, Jitika, to continue.
Thank you.
And to conclude what we have just heard from two very great speakers, I think, Sylvia, you have brought in the perspective very well. There are biases and there are, as Ms. Maja also mentioned, that there are institutional biases. At workplace, we know it, they coexist. And I think that's where we are as the council, that we want to make a dent to start making changes in that culture and the approach, and really look forward to driving this agenda more strongly with all of your participation. Moving forward, we as NLAC Council believes in research-based approach. One of our own council members, who is an academician, works in the area of gender study for achieving gender parity. Let me now welcome Dr. Pamela Singla, who is the head of department at the social work at the University of Delhi. Her areas of teaching include social work, education, gender studies, and social policy. Over the past 30 years of her teaching, her research has explored various issues of concerns such as women's participation in Panchayati Raj, women in corporate world, and their job satisfaction, among others. Dr. Singla, welcome, and over to you, please. Dr. Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes.
All right. So I'll say good afternoon. Good afternoon once again to everyone. And it's my pleasure to be here at this platform at the launch event. I congratulate the founder member, Dr. Harbeen Arora. I congratulate Umang Pathak, the president of WICCI, and the other team members who are of WICCI and who have been actively involved in making this event so successful. And I've been asked to speak on gender studies or gender research for gender parity, and I'll be very brief because I've been told 5 minutes. So I actually would stick on to that. So in fact, there's so much on gender studies and gender research when it comes to social work and the social sciences, and at the Department of Social Work, a lot of work is going on by way of demonstration projects, units, extension projects, and by way of research studies when it comes to gender studies. But the point I like to make is, and we all are aware, studies as a subject came up somewhere in the late 1980s, and most of us who have been a product of the schooling in the 1970s and early 1980s, we never had gender studies as a subject. So we took it up as a part of our calling. As a part of our growing up, we realized things were not right. Some our neighbors or friends, we used to talk about it. We are going to the same schools, but how come even in the classroom, why is it that the teacher would ask the boy to answer? And why is it that, there was some sort of a invisible discrimination, despite the fact that it's a convent school or otherwise in the families. So it's basically been a calling that, some of us took up gender studies as an area of our interest and as our research. And of course, I need to what is all about. Gender rejects this whole idea of men and women, that they are, fundamentally different in their abilities, in their temperament, in their skills, in their interest. It totally rejects that. It rejects this traditional polarization between men and women as natural opposites. Something that we've sort of, thought about, heard in the 60s and 70s and even till date, So gender is more inclusive also than women's studies. That's another point I'd like to make. So, most of our centers which came up were centers for women's studies. And to date, the centers of women's studies, except that, we've heard that recently now, they're coming up as gender development centers for gender studies. But basically, Center for Women's Studies, because women's issues were of concern, and that is what needed to be addressed. So, so gender is more inclusive than women's studies, and when it comes to social work, especially when we are working in the field, we basically look and change from women in development to gender and development. So when we're working in the field, we don't just go by imagination, we don't go by our emotions, we go by research, and we try to involve both men and women when it's basically coming, addressing issues in the field. Because just talking to women, of course, there could be specific issues, we are only talking to women, but generally, when it comes to the larger macro issues, when we're working in the field, we go by research findings, and we try to address both the entire family when we are making intervention plans. So the 2 points I'd like to actually make here is that even when we are trying to take up in social work also, otherwise also we've seen when we try to the issues are the same. So what kind of research does one take up? So it's important to remember that while women are seen as a unit, my earlier speakers have spoken about that the category women encompasses a great diversity of experiences. So it's not just one unit. Even if it's one unit, it's a lot of experiences. And within this one unit, it comprises of women of different caste, different class. We have women who have been widows. We have half widows, a term that comes up in conflict areas, like in Kashmir. So we have women in difficult circumstances, single women, middle-aged women, women who have been trafficked, women scavengers, women who are working as scavengers. Implying, basically the point I'm saying is that it basically implies that we need research in these areas when we talk about intervention and framing of the right kind of policies, primarily because the narratives of women need to be heard. It's not just men who have to be heard, because most of the time we end up thinking, and even when we're working in the field, that all right, if we've heard men, we have heard the entire story. But we need to also realize that men and women have different, they had experience life differently, and this needs to be heard. That's number one, the one point I'd like to make. And the second point I'd like to make, of course, an extension of this, is that when we talk about women's issues and so on, and we think that probably, whether we really need to address this or not, is basically also, being addressed by Mehboob ul Haq when he says that development, if we're talking about development, and development, if not engendered, is endangered. So that's supposed to be very important, that, just 50% of your population cannot comprise, the whole scenario. So it's important that women's voices are heard, and we have to indulge in gender-based research. And we're talking about kind of development might like to address. Also, it's important for me to say that one would wonder, why do we really talk about women's issues and the gender research? My speakers have spoken about it, and I'd like to reiterate some of the points that at least in India, we see gender disparity visible in various forms. And gender disparity in India, is seen in the form of one of the major indicators is adverse sex ratio. Then we also see that there is a different kind of access and control over resources. And studies have shown that, crores of rupees have been was done by way of time use surveys, or by in the form of gender analysis, which is very important to see, to understand who owns resources, who has access to resources, who controls resources. So it's very important that this aspect be studied, and it's seen that access and control over resources varies, which is of concern. And nowadays, even COVID has shown us that when it comes to technology, there have, most of us have come to know that basically the men access to technology. These are the aspects we need to really consider even in our research when it comes to gender studies and gender-based research. And even in the form of access to service delivery for clean water, education, maternal care, access to safe food. and exclusive roles, and of course the wage gap. Market schools and universities. I think the earlier speakers did speak about universities, and I really need to quote this report, Saksham report, which says that women students have felt that universities do not take them seriously enough, and students from Northeast are reported to face further discrimination in the city. So these are some of the aspects that we really need to look into when we're talking about gender studies. So all these aspects requires gender-based research, implying that whatever stance we take, it has to be substantiated by research. And work, I can undertake some of the studies, as has been said, in Panchayati Raj institutions. For example, the study of mine, which was on women's participation in Panchayati Raj institutions. So I happened to look into how women were participating in at all the three levels, at all the three tiers, that is village panchayat, block, and the Zilla Parishad, and I found that their participation was not up to the mark. By way of various parameters, participation, speaking up in the meetings, or maybe addressing the issues in the village at the village level, or maybe in the entire.
Okay, I see that Dr. Singla, we are unable to see you. Your network has been a bit patchy. Dr. Singla, would you like to unmute yourself? Yes, please.
So my study on women's participation in Panchayati Raj showed that women were not really participating.
Dr. Singla, your network is extremely patchy.
So what,
Dr. Singla,
yeah. So
please.
Am I audible now?
No, Dr. Singla, your network is still very patchy.
All right, so basically, I think I won't take much time trying to sort this out. But the point is that when we're talking about, now tell me, am I audible there?
Yes, you are.
All right. So basically, the point is that, I was trying to quote a study where I was trying to say that, in this study where we were trying to study women's participation in Panchayati Raj, so the finding was women are participating. So if we go by that stance, then the policy making would be different. But then the finding also showed that if women were not participating actively, so would men participation. So the point I'm trying to make is that at certain levels, one has to indulge in studying both men and women's participation to arrive at the right kind of policy making. And number two is that when you're talking about gender-based research, so it's not only just data that needs to be collected, because numbers give you a different kind of scenario, but it's very important that we substantiate the data, the quantitative analysis, by qualitative analysis. So it's data plus case studies. And in social work, we've gone by this mixed method approach, the primary data and the secondary data. We go by the mixed method approach, so that we can actually get a holistic picture. So for example, another study which was undertaken. Another study which was undertaken was on the adverse sex ratio in one of the districts of Haryana, which was Jhajjar. And the news reporting said that they don't even have a sufficient number of girls to get married to the men in that area. Now, am I audible? Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Singla, yeah, still very patchy.
All right, so the point, okay, let me just put it this way. Let me just put it this way. Let me put it that, when we're talking about any intervention in the field, so it cannot just be done by impressions and emotions. You have to, it has to be substantiated by research, because so as to come with effective interventions and policy making. And to conclude, I really look forward to my engagement, a very productive engagement with the WICCI, so that we can take up more of research-based work to make intervention at the policy level and at the grassroots. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was a little patchy, but I hope a lot of us could gather. I think some of the things I would like to do quick roundup as we plan to close our sessions shortly. Something that Sylvia said very interestingly, diversity is an established fact. We all know that, and it doesn't need to be questioned why. The important part is what is that we are doing to ensure our pipeline starts getting stronger. And on the similar lines, she also mentioned that there's a lack of professional network, and I would certainly say that we don't, in this session or in this platform, we are not trying to promote only all women's network, but what is important that it has to be more inclusive and gender neutral. Ms. Maja very, very aptly put in that when it comes to diversity, suddenly we start questioning the competence. The question here is, are we arguing the merit versus the argument of diversity? Her mantra on institutional bias, I have certainly written it down that I'm going to use going forward, is if we want to remove the institutional bias, well, we need to get in place a policy that recognizes the problem, a plan, pricing, practice, and proof. And I think the last one stands very, very true, that if we do not have performance-based proofing, this all would again remain to be an agenda that a lot of forums are also driving. Dr. Singla, your point very, very well taken. Needless to say that gender parity is required, but it doesn't have to be emotional. It has to be well researched. I think that's another very well said statement that I take away from for myself today, and I'm sure a lot of us also do. Due to paucity of time, we do see very, very interesting comments coming, and we really wish to answer them on our platforms as we go forward. To wrap up the session, our council has been structured as an organization to ensure we continue to deliver on the path under our president and me acting as the vice president to the council. Needless to say that there is a council behind us who have made this event live. Our marketing head, Ms. Mrinal Arora, has seamlessly worked to ensure we reach to you in every platform possible. We have been very, very lucky to have the students from IMT Ghaziabad who have taken tireless efforts to ensure that this event has been as creative and as smooth as it can be. Many, many thank you to our student research team, Tausif, Rishwa, and Saloni. Thank you so much for being with us. You being part of our team certainly re-energized the passion that we were already having. Thank you so much. Our creative head, Maitri, her designs have made our presence felt on the social media platform. Thank you so much, Maitri. Ms. Pragyashri is our head strategy and has been instrumental in weaving our event together. Our council members who are also part here are the founding members of the council. Thank you, dear council members, for coming forward together for establishing this council and committing ourselves to the way forwards. As NLAC, we have our plans to take this council to all states and shape a similar action strategy, and you will see more of us as we go forward. As we close the event, we also wish to invite all of you more often as we go forward and maybe partner with some of our participants to take the objectives to more actionable points. We request all our participants to follow our pages on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram to know more about our upcoming events, fire chats, and reading content for our followers. Once again, a very big, heartful compliments and regards to our distinguished speakers for their investment in time with us. No event is successful if we don't have our audience and participation. Thank you to each one of you for being here with us today. Wishing you a very, very good evening and wish you all a very Diwali. Stay home, stay safe. We will now close the session. Thank you.